There is a quiet pattern in your life that you keep trying to ignore, but it refuses to disappear. The pain you thought you left behind somehow finds its way back to you, not always in the same form, not always through the same people, but it carries a familiar weight that your soul instantly recognizes. You call it coincidence, you call it bad timing, you even try to convince yourself that this is just how life is, but somewhere deep inside, you know there is something more to it. Because pain is not random, it is intentional, almost like a message that has been sent to you again and again, waiting to be understood. Every time you avoid it, every time you choose distraction over reflection, it returns a little stronger, a little clearer, asking for your attention in ways that are harder to ignore. It is not here to break you, but it will keep breaking your comfort until you finally face what it has been trying to show you all along. There is a lesson hidden inside that discomfort, something about you, your boundaries, your fears, or the way you see yourself, that has not fully been realized yet. And until that moment of awareness happens, until you stop running and start listening, the cycle quietly continues, repeating itself in different shapes but carrying the same truth. The pain did not stay because it enjoys hurting you, it stayed because its purpose is not complete yet, because the lesson it carries is still waiting to land within you. The hardest truth to accept is that some of the pain you experience is not just happening to you, it is being allowed by you in ways you don't even realize. Not consciously, not intentionally, but through the patterns you haven't questioned yet. The way you keep giving chances where boundaries are needed, the way you stay silent when something inside you wants to speak, the way you ignore your own instincts just to keep things from falling apart. And so, life mirrors that back to you. It puts you in similar situations again and again, not to trap you, but to show you what you are still tolerating. Because what you refuse to face within yourself doesn't disappear, it repeats, louder each time. It shows up in people who treat you the same way, in moments that trigger the same emotions, in endings that feel painfully familiar. And every repetition carries an invitation, a chance to finally respond differently, to finally choose yourself in a way you couldn't before. But if you keep reacting the same way, if you keep avoiding the discomfort of change, the cycle continues, almost as if life is waiting for you to break it. Not by force, not by control, but by awareness. Because the moment you truly see it, the moment you understand what it's trying to teach you, everything begins to shift. The repetition loses its power, and the pain slowly starts to release. Until then, it stays, not as your enemy, but as your teacher, patiently waiting for you to finally understand what it has been trying to show you all along. What if the pain you've been running from is actually holding the exact answer you've been searching for? Not outside, not in other people, but within the parts of you that you've been afraid to confront. Because every discomfort carries a direction, every trigger points towards something deeper that needs your attention. It might be the way you seek validation, the way you attach your worth to how others treat you, or the way you abandon yourself just to feel accepted. These patterns don't just exist without reason, they are rooted in experiences you never fully processed, emotions you buried, truths you avoided. And so, the pain becomes a guide, even if it doesn't feel like one. It keeps pulling you back to the same internal space, asking you to look closer, to understand why certain things affect you the way they do. The lesson is not always obvious, it doesn't come in clear words, but it reveals itself in awareness. In the moment you pause instead of reacting, in the moment you choose to understand instead of escape. And slowly, as you begin to see it, as you begin to connect the dots, something shifts inside you. The pain starts to lose its intensity, not because it disappeared, but because you finally started listening to what it was trying to say. There was a time when you thought leaving was the solution, walking away from what hurt you, closing the chapter, and starting fresh somewhere new. And for a while, it felt like it worked. The environment changed, the people changed, and you convinced yourself that you had moved on. But then, slowly, almost unexpectedly, the same feelings began to return. Different faces, different conversations, but the same sense of being misunderstood, the same quiet disappointment, the same emotional weight sitting on your chest. And that's when it hit you, maybe the problem was never just out there. Maybe it was something within you that you carried into every new beginning. That realization didn't come easy. It felt heavy, almost uncomfortable to accept, because it meant you couldn't just run anymore. It meant you had to sit with yourself, to look at the patterns you created, the things you allowed, the parts of you that needed healing. And in that moment, something shifted. Not instantly, not perfectly, but enough to make you see things differently. You started noticing your reactions, questioning your choices, and slowly, you began to respond in ways you never did before. And for the first time, the cycle didn't repeat the same way. Not because life changed, but because you did. That's the moment everything starts to change, when you stop blaming the pattern, and start understanding your place within it. There comes a point where you start seeing the pattern clearly, and that awareness changes everything, but it also makes things harder in a different way. Because now, you can't pretend you don't know anymore. You can't go back to reacting the same way without feeling it deep inside you. Breaking the cycle isn't something that feels good at first, it feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, like you're stepping into a version of yourself you don't fully recognize yet. It means choosing silence when you used to chase, setting boundaries where you once overgave, walking away where you used to stay and hope things would change. And that shift, it doesn't come without resistance. There will be moments where the old you tries to pull you back, where the familiar pain feels easier than the unknown peace. But this is where the real growth begins, in those small, quiet decisions that no one else sees. The moments where you choose differently, even when it feels hard, even when it feels lonely. Because breaking the cycle is not about controlling life, it's about changing your response to it. And slowly, with every new choice, you create a different outcome. The pattern starts to weaken, not because it disappeared, but because you stopped feeding it with the same version of yourself. At some point, you begin to realize that pain was never meant to be permanent in your life, it was meant to be a messenger. And once the message is understood, once the lesson truly settles within you, something inside you shifts in a quiet but powerful way. You no longer need to go through the same kind of suffering to learn the same truth again. The things that once triggered you deeply start to lose their grip, not because they changed, but because your understanding did. You begin to respond with awareness instead of reaction, with clarity instead of confusion. And that's when life starts to feel different. Not perfect, not free of challenges, but lighter in a way you didn't think was possible before. Because now, you see things for what they are, not just for how they make you feel. You recognize the signs earlier, you trust yourself more, and you walk away from what no longer aligns with the version of you you've become. This is the shift most people wait their whole lives for without realizing it, the moment where you stop needing pain to teach you, because you've finally learned how to listen without it. And in that space, growth becomes something softer, something wiser, something that no longer has to hurt in order to transform you. There's a strange shift that begins to happen when you've been through enough repetition of the same emotional cycles. The silence around you doesn't feel empty anymore, it starts to feel meaningful. The moments where nothing is happening externally become the moments where everything starts happening internally. You begin to notice thoughts you used to ignore, feelings you used to push away, truths you used to avoid. And instead of running from that silence, something in you starts to stay with it. Because you realize silence was never the absence of life, it was the presence of understanding waiting to be heard. In that space, you start hearing yourself more clearly than ever before. Not the version of you shaped by fear or expectation, but the version that has always been underneath everything else. And slowly, you begin to understand that most of the answers you were searching for outside were already forming inside you just needed enough stillness to finally notice them. The silence doesn't change, but you do, and suddenly it becomes less of a void and more of a mirror reflecting everything you were too distracted to see before. One of the most unexpected parts of growth is that it doesn't feel like transformation while it's happening. It feels like confusion, like uncertainty, like slowly drifting away from everything you once considered normal. You start reacting differently without even trying, you stop explaining yourself in situations where you used to over-explain, and you begin to let go of things that once felt impossible to release. At first, it feels strange, almost like you're losing parts of yourself, but in reality, you're shedding versions of yourself that were built for survival, not for peace. And in that process, you start becoming someone you didn't plan to be, someone calmer, more aware, more selective with their energy, more intentional with their presence. You no longer chase every connection, you no longer attach your worth to every outcome, and you no longer abandon yourself just to keep things comfortable for others. And the most powerful part is, you didn't force this change, it happened naturally as a result of everything you survived, everything you learned, everything you finally understood. You didn't become someone new by choice alone, you became someone new because you could no longer remain the same. There comes a point where something quietly changes inside you, and you don't even notice it at first. The pain that once felt so heavy, so constant, so personal, slowly starts to lose its grip. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you stop feeding the same emotional responses that kept it alive. The situations may still happen, reminders may still appear, but your reaction is no longer the same. What once pulled you into overthinking now barely shakes you, what once broke your peace now only passes through without staying. And in that subtle shift, you realize something powerful: the pain was never permanent, it was repetitive, and repetition only exists as long as the lesson is not understood. But now, something inside you understands more than it reacts. You don't need to fight it anymore, you don't need to escape it anymore, because it no longer defines you. It becomes something you remember, not something you relive. And slowly, almost silently, it starts to fade, not because it was erased, but because it was finally understood. And then comes the moment that feels almost unremarkable from the outside, but inside you, everything aligns differently. You don't hear a loud realization, you don't see a dramatic shift, but you feel a quiet acceptance settle within you. The lesson that kept repeating itself through pain, through patterns, through people and situations, finally lands. And in that moment, you no longer feel like you're running through life trying to fix something broken, because you understand it was never about fixing, it was about seeing. Seeing yourself more clearly, seeing your patterns more honestly, seeing your reactions with awareness instead of judgment. And once that understanding settles, the cycle loses its purpose. Not because life stops challenging you, but because you stop repeating the same version of yourself in those challenges. You move differently now, you choose differently now, you feel differently now. And what once felt like endless pain becomes a chapter you've finally read, understood, and closed. Not with anger, not with regret, but with awareness. Because the pain didn't stay to destroy you, it stayed until the lesson finally landed.